G'day. While we were away, we were still making content. We were making it for patrons. We are going to be releasing it, however, slowly drip feeding it out, unless they start getting stale, which is obviously what's happening today, because you are getting a double bill. Whoa, 2-for-1 taste of Geordie's, absolutely free. Hey, if you want to help us out though, you can sign up to our Patreon, because we're really just doing this by ourselves. We really are versing the entire media nexus of a developed nation. It's not like we're, we're not cashed up in this fight. So make sure that you sign up to that just to help us out, and also you get some early access to videos as well as some little Q&As, and just do it because you're a nice person. Anyway, I've also got something else to address. Very unlike me, but I'm gonna have to reference The Simpsons, keeping in mind that I've already explained my hair. I'm gonna have to just elaborate on it. The reason that I look like I've put my head in a fucking bowling shine machine is because I actually was doing something noble. I was shaving it to save whatever the fuck this is. And then, right after that, I became the fucking endangered species. Like, I'm talking the next day. And so now we're getting to a point where it's getting better, and I've heard all of your comments. Yeah. Some of them were pretty good burns. None of them were as good as one at my live show, which is, tickets on sale now, but check this one out. Fuck me. Huh?
It's like Sid from Toy Story.
Yeah, look like, oh, he's... Look, if you can beat that burn, put it in the comments, but otherwise, watch the 2 videos where my hair goes from normal to fucked. Australia's status, not as a country, but rather an economic zone, is further solidified every day. Do we really have a country? A defining set of ideals and identity? Or are we just in the same place, following a unique set of laws that govern our economic interactions? Probably the latter. We all pay taxes to the same place, so I guess there's that unites us. You know what? Our apathy to this downward slide paradoxically might be a rare nation-defining characteristic. Our social cohesion is apparently at record lows. But I know one thing that Australians can all agree on. Who cares? This lack of cohesion is all well and good when economic conditions are somewhat decent, but there are serious structural problems with not just Australia's economy, but I think existential threats to Australia. And no, it's not the Orange Man. This isn't some resistance democracy spiel. I'd love for Trump to take over here, and I'm not going to elaborate further as to why. Alright, I will. It's because I want to save America from him, because he's just that bad. Rather, this video is just another of what I do best, whining about a politician who's been out of power for like 17 years. Yes, Coconut Man bad. By the way, you can buy my stand-up show about him if this video isn't enough, just saying. As John Howard, Australia's second longest serving Prime Minister, likes to pretend that he's this classically liberal, true blue Australian common sense battler. And look, culturally, he couldn't fit that role any better. A solicitor from Earlwood that had to get the fuck out of there as soon as it got too Greek. That was too exotic for John. I found Greek sensibilities to be a little bit too passionate for my liking, but I do appreciate their shrewd property investing talents. But economically, what John Howard did was transform the nation into basically a modern serf class. No, not that kind of serf class, this kind. Although it is Australia, so this'll do. A serf class to big multinational banks at the expense of almost all decent economic indicators. I know I sound like an annoying Occupy protester, but they were right, damn it! And I'm even more right. But it also needs to be stated how unique Australia's economic situation is. So, like, we're actually worse than, New York. We are, though, in this one specific field. When you compare us to other Western capitalist liberal democracies, land value in Australia is ridiculously overinflated to the point that it detriments every other industry. There's an interview with this American economist called Michael Hudson about Australia from a few years ago, and it does distill issues which I still think are really relevant, as there is nowhere else on earth with higher real estate prices than Australia. And what that does is make more of the land's rental value not even go to landlords, but the banks. So
the bankers today in Australia, including the foreign bankers, are playing the role that landlords used to play in the 19th century, that Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and everybody was trying to get rid of. But there's no group today that's trying to get rid of mortgage financing, where did the modern John Stuart Mill?
All the policies that lead to where we are now, they go against the classically liberal ideals of Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, and they really started with John Howard, the self-identified classical liberal. To that I say, John, facts don't care about your feelings. Just because you identify as something doesn't make you that thing, okay? Howard really began Australia's shift to tax income and sales, tangible things that actually generate real-world value in the economy as opposed to land speculation. We've got over it so many times, but Howard halved the capital gains tax. That might be the biggest sin in modern Australian political history. He removed all limitations on negative gearing and doubled migration, greatly incentivising the speculation of land and thus the borrowing of more money from big banks, while all around the same time he introduced the goods and services tax. That's a consumption tax. A tax which disproportionately hits lower income people. The effect of these policies might have been the mirage of some Australians thinking they're richer as they bought a house for 20 grand and a slab of VB, and that house is now worth $2 million and a slab of Crown Lager. Yeah, you literally moved up. But in reality, they destroyed the structure of Australia's economy. They made Australia's labour market incredibly unaffordable. As such, a high degree of income has to go into housing, which really is just going to paying interest to foreign banks, which kills off industry, as it makes manufacturing too expensive domestically, as who would want to pay for Australian workers when they need to be paid so much in order to barely afford storage for their meat when they're not at the factory? 1.5 million for a meat locker. This isn't the same in other countries. From the Hudson interview again, look at what he says about Germany, a country that, incidentally, still has a strong manufacturing industry. Only about 20% of their income goes towards housing. But that's where mining comes in. Howard basically rode off the coattails of the mining boom and allowed our exports to shield us from the shell of an economy that he created. So I am very sorry to keep harping on about this same interview, but it's just very nice hearing for once an American saying what I've been saying forever.
When I visited the Bank of Australia, they said, well, we really don't need much industrial employment because we are fortunate enough to live near China, and we can just export coal, we can live off export iron ore, we can just get by without having really to develop much industry. And what he meant is to employ many Australians.
So, we're a country with pretty much no national identity, economic complexity worse than Uganda, a virtually non-existent manufacturing sector, and some of the highest household debt in the world, mostly owed to foreign banks. Oh, and if not for importing plane loads of migrants, we'd be in a recession. But we have a lot of iron. So we're not poor yet. But you've got to admit that this is not an enviable situation that Labor's inherited when they won office in 2022, especially because so much capital is now tied up in land and debt to foreign banks that there is a lot of money that gets deployed to lobby against any changes to Australia's current system. We saw that in the 2019 election with the scare campaign the Liberals launched against Labor's proposed negative gearing changes, coupled with the fact that any deep fix for these issues probably requires deflating the property market, which is just going to piss off anyone over the age of 40 and also cause a recession. But the fact is, we're not in 2019 anymore. The situation is far more precarious. And I'm really reminded of this Lee Kuan Yew quote. I resolved to enable every household to own its own home if we were going to get people to take the national service seriously. I could not ask their sons to fight and die for the properties of the wealthy. He's referring to the fact that under his rule, Singapore created a state-owned property developer that built high-quality dwellings and sold them to people at cost, which is what most state governments are doing now, as well as the federal government. They're moving towards this, but that's a long-term thing. In the meantime, people can barely afford housing and there is no national identity. So how are we expected to function as a state? Am I wrong? John Howard and the Liberal Party created a serious national security issue here. Who in their right mind would fight a war to defend the right to pay landlords rent? Oh, and foreign banks' interest. It's getting out of hand. How much capital are we going to pour into housing before we think, okay, nah, we've done it, we've brought back serfdom? Do we really need to make it serfdom plus, now with mad swell? That means extra interest. There needs to be structural changes to Australia's economy if we want to keep the skeleton of a country that we have. And this is where I do have some good news to give you, because I think that one of the rare defining national characteristics of Australia is that we still have a trade union movement. That's a plus. And they've been pushing Labor to address these issues, and they have been doing that amid disproportionate backlash from special interest groups that have gotten used to plundering Australia since Howard, of course. Labor recently announced a migration overhaul. which just got out of hand after 10 years of the coalition. Because I know this might surprise you, as despite their tough on refugees rhetoric, the corporate interests that run the Liberal Party benefit greatly from huge, cheap influxes of labour. Labor, minus the U, are aiming to halve the intake. And thanks to the CFMEU, tradies have been carved out of the new skilled visa fast track program. They're also tightening integrity measures to prevent people coming over saying, yeah, I'm a student of good times. This will be decent for housing supply, considering how often we hear about how low the vacancy rates are, which is true on paper. Yet as the NGO Prosper Australia points out, our vacancy rates don't account for speculative vacancies. These are all the unadvertised vacancies. If you go to any development by Meriton at night and you look at how many lights are on, you'd shut up about, ooh, Chinese ghost cities. Look up there. You're in one! These vacancies are generally intentional, generally designed to increase the value of property. Developers treat houses in Australia like the De Beers treat diamonds in South Africa. 104,000 speculative vacancies in Melbourne alone in 2022. So, you can go on and on about, oh, migrants are driving up the price of housing. Well, it's very popular to say that, so you know what, fuck 'em. I mean, it's fair enough, like that is one of the factors, but as you can see, there are many. This, however, is a very good start. Labor are also announcing a heavy tightening of rules around foreign investment in Australia's housing market, including a tripling of foreign investment fees for purchasers of established homes, a doubling of vacancy fees for all foreign-owned dwellings purchased since the 9th of May 2017. Still, I think eventually public and political appetite for Labor to make larger changes like the ones that they proposed in 2019 will eventually come. Australia is heading in an unsustainable direction, and the business community can harp on and on about how they want to boost housing supply, but if all the new supply is sitting vacant for speculation, that's not going to change shit. Government policy is slowly moving in the right direction. The question is whether it can keep up with the market forces that are solidifying Australia's status as an economic zone and not a country. You want some good news about the cost of living? For the first time in 3 years, wage growth has beat inflation. That marks the first real wage increase since I made this video. Remember it? Exactly. It only got 74,000 views, which honestly concerns me a little more than this inflation. You guys claim to care so much about cost of living, whinging non-stop. Oh, it costs $10 for Samboy chips these days. If you really cared about your back pocket, maybe you'd start learning how to eat like an 1800s EastEnder instead. Oh wait, can't even get cheap eel no more! Well, you can, you just have to be willing to take matters into your own slippery hands, so to speak. I was reading this really interesting article in Australian Geographic the other day. The remarkable eels of Sydney Centennial Park. No, you're right, that's not even an option in Albanese's Australia. We're all in this expensive nanny hell state now, aren't we? You're not even afforded the basic liberty to hunt for your own food. It's true. Look at this. How disgraceful. This patriot hunted an ibis for dinner, 6 months in jail. The accused told the police that when he's high on meth, he enjoys hurting the Australian white ibis prior to cooking and eating the bird. So what? Is there really that much of a difference between having a coffee, buying a chook? That's just the coward's version of hunting your own ibis on meth. If you're gonna prosecute him for doing something far more disgusting. Send him to jail for huffing that purple vape. That's way less dignified than eating what is colloquially known as a bin chicken. But yeah, wages are finally above inflation and not causing a wage price spiral. And I know that this is predictable coming from me, but this is because of, say it with me audience, the Labor the Ibis Hunter. His ordeal made governments and businesses realise that they need to pay workers more or there will be more exotic birds on the chopping block, even though I don't think that he was doing it out of desperation. I think he's just fucked. The South Sydney duck hunters, on the other hand, this real wage increase was mostly driven by increases in public sector wages, which saw the largest quarterly rise in 15 years. And you know who controls the public sector? Red. Wage rise deals for teachers and nurses cut by unions and state Labor governments are the primary reason real wages are beginning to grow again. Look, nowhere near as fast enough. They're still just getting back to their 2011 levels, so I suspect you're going to see a few more Arnie Shelleys on TikTok yelling about grocery prices for now. But the public sector wage increases good start. Well, I think that's the opinion of anyone sane, but if you ask the Liberal opposition in New South Wales, they took a clear stand against nurses and teachers with this press release. Labor's budget puts union mates before families. You see, all the major parties, they're all controlled by unions, this one or this one. Pick your poison, Australia. Someone going to tell the Liberals that the Venn diagram of nurses and teachers of people with families is a smaller circle inside a bigger circle? Kind of hard to fearbugger about unions getting concessions when those concessions are literally just pay rises for tens of thousands of families. These are some of the most trusted professions in the country. There's almost 100,000 teachers in New South Wales and almost 100,000 nurses, but the way this is written, it makes it sound like these pay rises are some sort of shady backroom deal for union mates. Suppose they are in on it. Look at these thugs. We got you in power, Mins. Now it's time for you to do a favour for us. Which I suppose is technically true. Like, this press release really is a glass half empty way of looking at the world. Like, listen to this. This government's first priority is rewarding their union mates for their support during the election campaign. Well, are they wrong? Chris Minns lacks vision. Fuck, I didn't know he was blind. And ultimately, families and households across New South Wales will pay the price. Which again, yes, that is how public servant salaries work, I suppose. So that is coming out of my back pocket. But what is this big shady deal the Liberals are alluding to? Oh, it's teachers saying during the 2023 election, don't vote for Peritate because under the Libs we've had a 12-year salary cap. When will the rorts end? Yeah, the cost of living is out of hand, but the few moves being made that are increasing real wages are the polar opposite of what you should blame for the cost of living crisis, except the Coalition are attempting to do just that. Next, they're going to blame pork roll shops that kept their prices the same for 5 years. By providing Labor's union mates with such cheap feeds, Larry's hot bread has flushed excess cash into the economy, making it harder for everyday families to buy the essentials, such as perishables from Larry's hot bread. Oh. If you really want to blame Labor for the cost of living, don't go after them for raising the pay of workers. Go after them for their weak migration policy. Well, the Libs do that, but that is the pot calling the kettle black. As I've pointed out too many times, Howard is the man that radically changed migration policy in this country. He doubled the permanent intake. You don't get honesty in the migration debate, pretty much because Howard looks like he would have been at the Cronulla riots, not participating, but, you know, just off on the side, giving a knowing look. And thus everyone thinks the Liberals are anti-migration, and to oppose the Liberals, you're going to be reflexively pro-large migration intakes. But in reality, no one in the political establishment of Australia has remotely pro-Australian work and migration policies. That being said, Labor's policy has always been far more pro-worker than the Coalition's, but you wouldn't know it because the migration debate always has this veneer of race politics that allows the debate to become a shallow culture war, in which politicians, think tanks, and the media get to rely on dumb cultural sloganeering, sometimes, but far less often discussing the economic impacts of migration, mostly when big business is getting antsy about the lack of welders who are willing to chuck a Scott Morrison and work without a mask. Take for instance big business aligned think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs. They write extensively on migration and their position changes depending on what government is in. Look at this article from 2017 when the Liberals were in power. Reducing immigration won't solve the housing crisis. You know what that headline should read? Liberal Party, please continue the unprecedented amounts of immigrants. We really like the extra demand and flow of cheap labour. Then take this article from 2024 when Labor are in. Latest housing shortfall research confirms consequences of unplanned migration. In other words, you're in power now, Labor. No excuses. Fix 10 years of coalition housing and migration policy by tomorrow, please. Here's another one from 2017 when the Liberals were in. Immigrants boost the economy and should be welcomed. And then from 2023, Australians turning against unplanned mass migration. $7,800 a year worse off. But similar is the dishonesty from progressive think tanks, forced to decide whether their performative cultural cringe over being Aussie should outweigh their ostensibly I'm for the working class analysis of economics. Take this article from the Australia Institute. Australia is like not being flooded by migrants. Yes, we are, you preachy dickheads. And to admit that doesn't mean you're a racist or a reactionary that hates migrants. It doesn't make you just really mean, like just a really mean dude. Fuck, I hate dudes. It just makes you honest. In this article, the Australia Institute uses the 3-year average of migration to pretend that insanely high annual figures of migration aren't alarming because the 3-year average is low and we're now only making up for the dearth of migrants during COVID. I'm sorry, is this an Australia Institute article or a Business Council press release? Because what happened during COVID when there was record low migration? Oh, people could pay their rent. And real wages were much stronger. And this was in no small part because of the near total shutdown of migration. It's not the only reason, but it was a fucking big one. Before the COVID drop, Australia had pretty much the highest level of migration as a percentage of population in the developed world, only behind Luxembourg, which has like 3 people to begin with. So they only need 1 person to walk in to beat Australia. Holy shit, a 25% population increase. But no one seems to want to point this out because they're either compromised by business interests or scared of looking like Donald Trump, which to that I say, guys, don't worry, you won't. You don't have his riz. You don't have any riz. This is despite massive public support for reeling in migration. Poll after poll shows that Australians think we're letting in too many people, and these polls stand beside other polls that suggest that Australians have an overall positive personal view towards migrants. So that's the disconnect. Australians at large get that this is an economic and ecological issue, not some parochial culture war, so why can't people in power act in their interests? It'd be less of a risk than Labor's backflip on tax cuts, which they easily won Australians over with. My message to Labor would be that the changes they've made are decent, but serious reform is needed, and if it doesn't happen, this issue will seriously dog you in the future. For instance, the burden on state infrastructure means it'll be harder to give those pay rises that got real wages up. Listen to party elder Bob Carr on this one.
The advantages of high levels of immigration are assumed and never explained. And I think in Sydney, but these days every bit as much in Melbourne and in Brisbane. The disadvantage of running immigration at these super high levels, the highest levels in the developed world, are very clear. The burden on state budgets of extra infrastructure, but above all, the increased cost of housing. The price of housing reflects the laws of supply and demand. And if you pump more people in, if you pump up immigration to the highest ever level we've seen, then the pressure on housing is huge. And everyone understands that. That's the demand side. And we're not building enough apartments to keep up with the force-fed population growth that high immigration represents. Young people struggling with home purchase and renters being hugely disadvantaged will easily nominate that they stand for a reduction in immigration to take pressure off this overheated home and rental market.
That all being said, not even the Greens, who are comfortable floating the most radical and sometimes outlandish of policies to deal with the housing crisis, have the guts to suggest a drop in migration. It's truly an issue that the political class won't touch. You can like migrants and still think migration needs to be reined in. I think migrants play an important role in Australian society. Without them, we wouldn't have Tom the Ibis Eater, whose antics padded a good 5 minutes of this video. But as we can clearly see from Tom's antics, they're irrefutably an ecological drain on this country. I think we all want our Optus executives to be safe, but that's the point of this video. The cost of living is getting marginally better because of unions, but there is a lot of forces in this country that offer false solutions to the cost of living crisis while benefiting from the very policies that exacerbate it. So don't worry, I'll do another video on this topic soon because it's all anyone wants to hear about anyway, but for now, how about you take some personal responsibility, Maybe if you stop whinging so much and got off your fucking iPhones, painted your face with the Australian flag, marched down to Cronulla, the price of lettuce would go down. Well, there you go. There was 2 videos that definitely wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for our Patreon members. So make sure that you become one of those, get early access, get to suggest what videos we do next, such as what do they want this week?
Just eat the damn oranges!